In the midst of such realizations, a man needs comfort. Herzog once more set off on his visit to Ramona. As he stood at the door with the long metal shank of the police lock in his hand, his memory sought a certain song title. It was Just One More Kiss. Not that, nor The Curse of an Aching Heart. Kiss Me Again. That was it. It struck him very funny, and laughter made him clumsy, as he set up the complicated lock to protect his worldly goods. 3,000 million human beings exist, each with some possessions, each a microcosmos, each infinitely precious, each with a peculiar treasure. There is a distant garden where curious objects grow, and there, in a lovely dust of green, the heart of Moses E. Herzog hangs like a peach. I need this outing like a hole in the head, he thought, as he turned the key. Still, he was going, wasn't he? He was pocketing the key, and now ringing for the elevator. He listened to the sound of the power, the cables threshing. He went down alone, humming Kiss Me, and trying to capture, as if it were an elusive, fragile thread, the reason why these old songs were running through his head. Not the obvious reason. He had an aching heart, was going forth to be kissed. The recondite reason, if that was worth finding. He was glad to reach the open air, to breathe. He dried the sweatband of the straw hat with his handkerchief. It was hot in the shaft, and who wore such a hat, such a blazer? Why, Lou Holtz, of course, the old vaudeville comic he sang. I picked a lemon in the garden of love, where they say only peaches grow. Herzog's face again quickened with a smile. The old Oriental Theater in Chicago. 3 hours of entertainment for 2 bits. At the corner, he paused to watch the work of the wrecking crew. The great metal ball swung at the walls, passed easily through brick, and entered the rooms. The lazy wait browsing on kitchens and parlors. Everything it touched wavered and burst, spilled down. There rose a white tranquil cloud of plaster dust. The afternoon was ending, and in the widening area of demolition was a fire, fed by the wreckage. Moses heard the air softly pulled toward the flames, felt the heat. The workmen, heaping the bonfire with wood, threw strips of molding like javelins. Paint and varnish smoked like incense. The old flooring burned gratefully. The funeral of exhausted objects, scaffolds, walled with pink, white-green doors, quivered as the 6-wheeled trucks carried off a fallen brick. The sun, now leaving for New Jersey and the West, was surrounded by a dazzling broth of atmospheric gases. Herzog observed that people were spattered with red stains, and that he himself was flecked on the arms and chest. He crossed 7th Avenue and entered the subway. Out of the burning, the dust, down the stairs, he hurried underground, listening for a train, fingers examining the coins in his pocket, seeking a subway token. He inhaled the odors of stone, of urine, bitterly tonic, the smells of rust and of lubricants, felt the presence of a current of urgency, speed, of infinite desire, possibly related to the drive within himself, his own streaming nervous vitality. Passion? Perhaps hysteria? Ramona might relieve him by sexual means. He took a long breath, inhaling the musty damp air endlessly, on and on, stabbed in both shoulders as his chest expanded, but continuing. Then he let the air out slowly, very slowly, down, down, into his belly. He did it again, and felt better for it. He dropped his fare in the slot where he saw a whole series of tokens, lighted from within and magnified by the glass. Innumerable millions of passengers had polished the wood of the turnstile with their hips. From this arose a feeling of communion, brotherhood, in one of the cheapest forms. This was serious, thought Herzog, as he passed through. The more individuals are destroyed by processes such as I know, the worse their yearning for collectivity. Worse, because they return to the mass agitated, made fervent by their failure. Not as brethren, but as degenerates. Experiencing a raging consumption of potato love. Thus occurs a second distortion of the divine image, already so blurred, wavering, struggling. The real question? He stood looking down at the tracks. The most real question. Rush hour was just ended. Almost empty local cars were scenes of rest and peace. Conductors reading the papers. Waiting for his uptown express, Herzog made a tour of the platform, looking at the mutilated posters. Blacked-out teeth and scribbled whiskers, comical genitals like rockets, ridiculous copulations, slogans, and exhortations. Muslims, the enemy is white. Hell with Goldwater. Jews. Spics eat shit. Phone I will go down on you if I like the sound of your voice. And by a clever cynic, if they smite you, turn the other face. Filth, quarrelsome madness, the prayers and wit of the crowd. Minor works of death. Transcendence. That was the new fashionable term for it. Herzog carefully examined all such writings, taking his own public opinion poll. He assumed the unknown artists were adolescents, taunting authority. Immaturity, a new political category. Problems connected with the increasing mental emancipation of untrained unemployables. Better the Beatles. Further occupying the idle moment, Herzog looked at the penny scale. The mirror was wired. Could not be smashed except by an ingenious maniac. The benches were bolted down. The candy vending machines padlocked. A note to Willie, the actor, the famous bank robber, now serving a life sentence. Dear Mr. Sutton, the study of locks, mechanical devices, and Yankee genius. He began again, second only to Houdini. Willie never carried a gun. In Queens once, he used a toy pistol, disguised as a Western Union messenger. He entered the bank and took it over with his cap gun. The challenge was irresistible. Not the money, really, but the problem of getting in, and the companion problem of escape. Narrow-shouldered with sunk cheeks and the mothy, dapper mustache, blue baggy eyes above, Willie lay thinking of banks. On his indoor bed in Brooklyn, sucking a cigarette, wearing his hat and a pair of pointed shoes, he had visions of roofs leading to roofs, of power lines, sewer connections, vaults. All locks opened at his touch. Genius cannot let the world be. He had buried his loot in Flushing Meadows, in tin cans. He might have retired, but he took a walk. He saw a bank, a creative opportunity. This time he was caught and went to prison. But he planned a great getaway, made an elaborate mental survey, and drew a master plan, crawled through pipes, dug under walls. He almost had it made. The stars were in view, but the screws were waiting when he broke through the earth. They carried him back, this insignificant person, the escape artist, one of the greatest, and not very far behind Houdini either. Motive. The power and completeness of all human systems must be continually tested, outweighed at the risk of freedom, of life. Now he is a lifter. He say he owns a set of the great books, corresponds with Bishop Sheen. Dear Dr. Schrodinger, in what is life? You say that in all of nature only man hesitates to cause pain, as destruction is the master method by which evolution produces new types. The reluctance to cause pain may express a human will to obstruct natural law. Christianity and its parent religion, a few short millennia with frightful reveres. The train had stopped. The door was already shutting when Herzog roused himself and squeezed through. He caught a strap. The express flew uptown. It emptied and refilled at Times Square, but he did not sit down. It was too hard to fight your way out again from a seat. Now, where were we? In your remarks on entropy, how the organism maintains itself against death, in your words, against thermodynamic equilibrium, being an unstable organization of matter. The body threatens to rush away from us. It leaves. It is real. It, not we, not I. This organism, while it has the power to hold its own form and suck what it needs from its environment, attracting a negative stream of entropy, the being of other things which it uses, returning the residue to the world in simpler form. Dung, nitrogenous wastes, ammonia, but reluctance to cause pain coupled with the necessity to devour. A peculiar human trick is the result, which consists in admitting and denying evils at the same time. To have a human life and also an inhuman life. In fact, to have everything, to combine all elements with immense ingenuity and greed. To bite, to swallow. At the same time, to pity your food. To have sentiment. At the same time, to behave brutally. It has been suggested, and why not, that reluctance to cause pain is actually an extreme form, a delicious form of sensuality, and that we increase the luxuries of pain by the injection of the moral pathos, thus working both sides of the street. Nevertheless, there are moral realities. Herzog assured the entire world as he held his strap in the speeding car, as surely as there are molecular and atomic ones. However, it is necessary today to entertain the very worst possibilities openly. In fact, we have no choice as to that. This was his station, and he ran up the stairs. The revolving gates rattled their multiple bars and ratchets behind him. He hastened by the change booth, where a man sat in a light the color of strong tea, and up the 2 flights of stairs. In the mouth of the exit he stopped to catch his breath. Above him the flowering glass, wired and gray, and Broadway heavy and blue in the dusk, almost tropical. At the foot of the downhill 80s lay the Hudson, as dense as mercury. On the points of radio towers in New Jersey, red lights like small hearts beat or tingled. In mid-street, on the benches, old people. On faces, on heads, the strong marks of decay, the big legs of women and blotted eyes of men, sunken mouths and inky nostrils. It was the normal hour for bats swooping raggedly, Louisville or pieces of paper, New York, to remind Herzog of bats. An escape balloon was fleeing like a sperm, black and quick, into the orange dust of the west. He crossed the street, making a detour to avoid a fog of grilled chicken and sausage. The crowd was traipsing over the broad sidewalk. Moses took a keen interest in the uptown public, its theatrical spirit, its performers, the transvestite homosexuals, painted with great originality, the wigged women, the lesbians, looking so male you had to wait for them to pass, and see them from behind to determine their true sex. Hair dyes of every shade. Signs in almost every passing face of a deeper comment or interpretation of destiny. Eyes that had held metaphysical statements, and even pious old women who trod the path of ancient duty, still buying kosher meat. Herzog had several times seen George Hoberly, Ramona's friend, before him, following him with his eyes from one or another of these doorways. He was thin, tall, younger than Herzog, correctly dressed in Ivy League Madison Avenue clothes, dark glasses on his lean, sad face. Ramona, with the accent of on nothing, said she felt nothing but pity for him. His 2 attempted suicides probably made her realize how indifferent she was to him. Moses had learned from Madeline that when a woman was done with a man, she was done with him utterly. But tonight it occurred to him that since Ramona was keen on men's styles and often tried to guide his choices, Hoberly might be wearing the clothes she had picked for him. He is vainly appealing, in the trappings of his former happiness and love, like the trained mouse in the frustration experiment. Even being phoned by the police and running to Bellevue in the middle of the night to be by his side now bores Ramona. The whole feeling and sensation market has shot up. Shock, scandal, priced out of range for the average man. You have to do more than take a little gas or slash the wrists. Pot? 0. Daisy chains? Nothing. Debauchery? A museum word from prelibidomus times. The day is fast approaching. In case you're curious about the spelling of that word, prelibidomus. Prelibidomus times. The day is fast approaching. Herzog, in his editorial, state, when only proof that you are despairing will entitle you to the vote, instead of the means test, the poll tax, the literacy exam, you must be forlorn. Former vices, now health measures. Everything changing. Public confession of each deep wound, which at one time was borne as if nothing were amiss. A good subject. The history of composure in Calvinistic societies, when each man, feeling fearful damnation, had to behave as one of the elect. All such historic terrors, every agony of spirit, must at last be released. Herzog began to be almost eager to see Hoberly, to have another look at that face wasted by suffering, insomnia, nights of pills and drink, of prayer, his dark glasses, his almost brimless fedora. Unrequited love, nowadays called historical dependency. There were times when Ramona spoke of Hoberly with great sympathy. She said she had been crying over one of his letters or gifts. He kept sending her purses and perfumes and long extracts from his journal. He had even sent her a large sum of cash. This she turned over to Aunt Tamara. The old lady opened a savings account for him. Let the money gather a little interest, at least. Hoberly was attached to the old woman. Moses, too, was fond of her. He rang Ramona's bell, and the buzzer opened the lobby door at once. He was considerate that way. One more delicate attention. The arrival of her lover was never routine. The elevator let people out. A fellow with a heavy front, one eye shut, smoking a strong cigar, a woman with 2 chihuahuas, red nail polished, matching the harness of the dogs, and, perhaps, in the whirling fumes of the street, through 2 glass doors, his rival watched him. Moses rode up. On the 15th floor, Ramona had the door ajar, on the chain. She didn't want to be surprised by the wrong man. When she saw Moses, she unbolted and took his hand, drawing him to her side. She offered her face to him. Herzog found it full and very hot. Her perfume sprang out at him. She wore a white satin blouse, cut to suggest the wrapping of a shawl, and showing her bust. Her face was flushed. She did not need the added color of rouge. "I'm glad to see you, Ramona. I'm very glad," he said. He hugged her, discovering in himself a sudden eagerness, a hunger for contact. He kissed her. "So, you're glad to see me?" "I am. I am." She smiled and shut the door, bolting it again. She led Herzog by the hand along the uncarpeted hall, where her heels made a military clatter. It excited him. "Now," she said, "let's have a look at Moses in his finery." They stopped before the gilt, ornate mirror. "You have a great straw hat. And what a coat! Joseph's coat of stripes. You approve?" "I certainly do. It's a beautiful jacket. You look Indian in it, with your dark coloring." "I may join the Bellow group." "Which is that?" "Sharing large estates among the poor. All give away Louisville." "You'd better consult me before you start another giveaway program. Shall we have a drink? Perhaps you'd like to wash up while I get the drinks. I shaved before leaving the house. You look hot, as if you've been running. And you've got soot on your face." He must have leaned against a subway pillar, or perhaps it was a smudge from the wreckage bonfire. "Yes, I see. I'll get you a towel, dear," said Ramona. In the bathroom, Herzog turned his tie to the back of his neck to keep it from drooping into the basin. This was a luxurious little room with indirect lighting, kindness to haggard faces. The long tap glittered, the water rushed forth. He sniffed the soap. Maguit. The water felt very cold on his nails. He called the old Jewish ritual of nail water, and the word in the Haganah, Rachetz, "Thou shalt wash." It was obligatory also to wash when you returned from the cemetery, Beth Olam, the dwelling of the multitude. But why think of ceremonies of funerals now? Unless, the old joke about the Shakespearean actor in the brothel, when he took off his pants and wore in bed, when he took off his pants, the whore in bed gave a whistle. He said, "Madame, we come to bury Caesar, not to praise him." How schoolboy jokes clung to you. He opened his mouth under the tap and let the current run also into his shut eyes, gasping with satisfaction. Broad discs of iridescent brightness swam under his lids. He wrote to Spinoza. "Thoughts not casually connected were said by you to cause pain. I find that it is indeed the case. Random association, when the intellect is passive, is a form of bondage. Or rather, every form of bondage is possible then. It may interest you to know that in the 20th century, random association is believed to yield up the deepest secrets of the psyche." He realized he was writing to the dead, to bring the shades of great philosophers up to date. But then why shouldn't he write to the dead? He lived with them as much as with the living, perhaps more. And besides, his letters to the living were increasingly mental, and anyway, to the unconscious, what was death? Dreams did not recognize it. Believing that reason can make steady progress from disorder to harmony, and that the conquest of progress, of chaos, need not be begun anew every day. How I wish it! How I wish it were so! How Moses prayed for this! As for his relation to the dead, it was very bad indeed. He really believed in letting the dead bury their own dead, and that life was life only when it was understood clearly as dying. He opened the large medicine chest they used to build on the grand scale in old New York. Fascinated, he studied Ramona's bottles, skin freshener, estrogenic deep tissue lotion, Bonnie Bell antiperspirant. Then this crimson prescription twice daily for upset stomach. He smelled it and thought it must contain belladonna, calming for the stomach, mydriatic in the eyes, made of deadly nightshade. There were also pills for menstrual cramp. Somehow he didn't think Ramona was the type Madeline used to scream. He had to take her in a taxi to St. Vincent's, where she cried for the Demerol injection. These forceps-looking things, he thought, must be for curling the eyelashes. They looked like the snail tongs in a French restaurant. He sniffed the scouring mitten, especially for the elbows and heels, he thought, to rub away the bumps. He pressed the toilet lever with his foot. It flushed with silent power. The toilets of the poor always made noise. He applied a little brillantine to the dry ends of his hair. His shirt was damp, of course, but she was wearing perfume enough for them both. And how was she otherwise? All things considered, not too bad. Ruin comes to beauty inevitably. The space-time continuum reclaims its elements, taking you away bit by bit, and then again comes the void. But better the void than the torment and boredom of an incorrigible character, doing always the same stunts, repeating the same disgraces. But these instants of disgrace and pain could seem eternal, so that if a man could capture the eternity of these painful moments and give them a different content, he would achieve a revolution. How about that? Wrapping the palm of his hand tightly in the towel, like a barber, Herzog wiped the drops of moisture in his hairline. Next, he thought, he would weigh himself. He used the toilet first to make himself a little lighter, and stripped off his shoes without bending, climbing on the scale with an elderly sigh. Between his toes, the pointer swept past the 170 mark. He was regaining the weight he had lost in Europe. He forced his feet into the shoes again, treading down the backs, and returned to Ramona's sitting room, her sitting and sleeping room. He was waiting with 2 glasses of Campari. Its taste was bittersweet, and its odor a little gassy, from the gas main. But all the world was drinking it, and Herzog drank it too. Ramona had chilled the glasses in the freezer. "Salud." "Struch," he said. "Your necktie is hanging down your back." "It is?" He pulled it to the front again. "Forgetful, I once tucked my jacket into the back of my trousers, coming from the gentleman's room, and walked in to teach a class." Ramona seemed astonished that he would tell such a story on himself. "Wasn't that dreadful?" "Not too good, but it should have been very liberating for the students. Teacher is mortal. Besides, the humiliation didn't destroy him. This should have been more valuable than the course itself. In fact, one of the young ladies told me later I was very human. Such a relief to us all." What is funny is how completely you answer any question. You are a funny man. Engagingly affectionate, her fine large teeth, tender dark eyes, enriched by black lines, smiled upon him. "It's the way you try to sound rough or reckless, though, like a guy from Chicago, that's even more amusing." "Why amusing?" "It's an act. Swagger. It's not really you." She refilled his glass and stood up to go to the kitchen. "I've got to look after the rice. I'll put on some Egyptian music to keep you cheerful." A wide patent leather belt set off her waist. She bent over the phonograph. "The food smells delicious. Mohammed al-Bakar. and his band began with drums and tambourines, and then a clatter of wires and braying wind instruments. A guttural, pimping voice began to sing. Myport said, Herzog alone looked at the books and theater programs, magazines and pictures. A photograph of Ramona as a little girl stood in a Tiffany frame, 7 years old, a wise child leaning on a bank of plush, her finger pressing on her temple. He remembered the pose. A generation ago it used to get them, little Einsteins. Prodigious wisdom in children, pierced ears, a locket, a kiss-me curl, and the kind of early sensuality in tiny girls which he recalled very well. Aunt Tamara's clock began to chime. He went into her parlor to look at its old-fashioned porcelain face, with long gilt lines, like cat whiskers, and listened to the bright, quick notes. Beneath it was the key. To own a clock like this, you had to have regular habits, a permanent residence. Raising the window shade of this little European parlor, with its framed scenes of Venice and friendly Dutch porcelain inanities, you saw the Empire State Building, the Hudson, the green silver evening half of New York lighted up. Thoughtful, he pulled the shade down again. This asylum was his for the asking. He believed. Then why didn't he ask? Because today's asylum might be the dungeon of tomorrow. To listen to Ramona, it was all very simple. She said she understood his needs better than he, and she might well be right. Ramona never hesitated to express herself fully, and there was something unreserved, positively operatic, about some of her speeches. Opera. Heraldry. She said her feelings for him had depth and maturity, and that she had an enormous desire to help him. She told Herzog that he was a better man than he knew, a deep man, beautiful. He could not help wincing when she said this, but sad, unable to take what his heart really desired, a man tempted by God, longing for grace, but escaping headlong from his salvation, often close at hand. This Herzog, this man of many blessings, for some reason had endured a frigid, middle-brow, castrating female in his bed, given her his name and made her the instrument of creation. And Madeline had treated him with contempt and cruelty, as if to punish him for lowering and cheapening himself, for lying himself into love with her and betraying the promise of his soul. What he really must do, she went on, in this same operatic style, unashamed to be so fluent, he marveled at this, was to pay his debt for the great gifts he had received, his intelligence, his charm, his education, and free himself to pursue the meaning of life. Not by disintegration, where he would never find it, but humbly and yet proudly continuing his learned studies. She, Ramona, wanted to add riches to his life and give him what he pursued in the wrong places. This she could do by the art of love, she said, the art of love which was one of the sublime achievements of the spirit. It was love she meant by riches. What he had to learn from her while there was time, while he was still virile, his powers substantially intact, was how to renew the spirit through the flesh, a precious vessel in which the spirit rested. Ramona, bless her, was as florid in these sermons as in her looks. Oh, what a sweet orator she was! But where were we? Ah, yes, he was to continue his studies, aiming at the meaning of life. He, Herzog, overtake life's meaning. He laughed into his hands, covering his face. But Sobering, he knew that he elicited these speeches by his airs. Why did little Sono cry, "Oh, mon philosophe, mon professeur d'amour"? Because Herzog behaved like a philosophy who cared only about the very highest things, creative reason, how to render good for evil, and all the wisdom of old books. Because he thought and cared about belief, without which human life is simply a raw material of technological transformation, of fashion, salesmanship, industry, politics, finance, experiment, automatism, etc., etc. The whole inventory of disgraces which one is glad to terminate in death. Yes, he looked like, behaved like, Sono's philosophie. And after all, why was he here? He was here because Ramona also took him seriously. She thought she could restore order and sanity to his life, and if she did that, it would be logical to marry her. Or, in her style, he would desire to be united with her, and it would be a union that really unified. Tables, beds, parlors, money, laundry, and automobile, culture, and sex knit into one web. Everything would at last make sense, was what she meant. Happiness was an absurd and even harmful idea, unless it was really comprehensive. But in this exceptional and lucky case, where each had experienced the worst sorts of morbidity, and come through by a miracle, by an instinct for survival and delight which was positively religious, there was simply no other way to talk about her life, said Ramona, except in terms of Magdalene Christianity. Comprehensive happiness was possible. In that case, it was a duty to refuse to answer the accusations against happiness, that it was a monstrous and selfish delusion, an absurdity, was cowardly, a surrender to malignancy, capitulating to the death instinct. There was a man, Herzog, who knew what it was to rise from the dead, and she, Ramona, she knew the bitterness of death and nullity too. Yes, she too. But with him she experienced a real Easter. She knew what resurrection was. He might look down his conscious nose at sensual delight, but with her, when their clothes were off, he knew what it was. No amount of sublimation could replace that erotic happiness, that knowledge. Not even tempted to smile, Moses listened earnestly, bowing his head. Some of it was current university or paperback chatter, and some was propaganda for marriage. But after such debits were entered against her, she was genuine. He sympathized with her, respected her. It was all real enough. She had something genuine at heart. When he jeered in private at the Dionysiac revival, it was himself he made fun of. Herzog, a prince of the erotic Renaissance in his macho garments. And what about the kids? How could they like a new stepmother? How would they like a new stepmother? And Ramona, would she take Junie to see Santa Claus? Ah, this was where you are, said Ramona. Aunt Tamara would be flattered if she knew you were interested in her Tsarist museum. These old-time interiors, said Herzog. Isn't it touching? They drugged you with schmaltz. The old woman is so fond of you. I like her too. She says you brighten up the house. He smiled. Why not? You have a tender, trusting face. You can't bear to hear that, can you? Why not? I put the old woman out when I come, he said. You're wrong. She loves these trips. She puts on a hat and gets dressed up. It's Such a thing for her to go to the railroad station. Anyway, Ramona's tone changed. She needs to get away from George Horberly. He's become her problem now. For a brief instant, she was downcast. Sorry, said Herzog. Has it been bad lately? Poor man, I feel so sorry for him. But come, Moses, dinner is all ready, and I want you to open the wine. In the dining room, she handed him a bottle. Pouilly Fusée, well chilled, and the French corkscrew. With competent hands and strong purpose, his neck reddening as he exerted himself, he pulled the cork. Ramona had lighted the candles. The table was decorated with spiky red gladiolas in a long dish. On the windowsill, the pigeons stirred and grumbled. They fluttered and went to sleep again. Let me help you to this rice, said Ramona. She took the plate, good bone china with a cobalt rim, the steady spread of luxury into all ranks of society since the 15th century, noted by the famous Sombart, inter alia. But Herzog was hungry, and the dinner was delicious. He would become austere hereafter. Tears of curious mixed origin came into his eyes as he tasted the shrimp remoulade. Awfully good, my good. How good, he said. Haven't you eaten all day? Said Ramona. I haven't seen food like this for some time. Prosciutto and Persian melon. What's this? Watercress salad. Good Christ! She was pleased. Well, eat, she said. After the shrimp, Arnaud, and salad, she offered cheese and cold water biscuits, rum-flavored ice cream, plums from Georgia, and early green grapes. Then brandy and coffee. In the next room, Mohammed al-Bakr kept singing his windling, nasal, insinuating songs to the sounds of wire coat-hangers moved back and forth, and drums, tambourines, and mandolins, and bagpipes. What have you been doing? Said Ramona. Me? Oh, all kinds of things. Where did you go on the train? Were you running away from me? Not from you, but I suppose I was running. You're still a little afraid of me, aren't you? I wouldn't say that. Confused. Trying to be careful. You're used to difficult women. You struggle. Perhaps you like it when they give you a bad time. Every treasure is guarded by dragons. That's how you can tell it's valuable. Do you mind if I unbutton my collar? It seems to be pressing on an artery. But you came right back. Perhaps that was because of me. Moses was strongly tempted to lie to her, to say, yes, Ramona, it was you. Strict and literal truthfulness was a trivial game, and might even be a disagreeable neurotic affliction. Ramona had Moses' complete sympathy, a woman in her 30s, successful in business, independent, but still giving such suppers to gentlemen friends. But in times like these, how should a woman steer her heart to fulfillment? In emancipated New York, man and woman, gaudily disguised like two savages belonging to hostile tribes, confront each other. The man wants to deceive and then to disengage himself. The woman's strategy is to disarm and detain him. And this is Ramona. A woman who knows how to look after herself. Think how it is with some young thing, raising mascara-ringed eyes to heaven, praying, "Oh, Lord, let no bad man come unto my chubbiness." Besides which, Herzog realized that to eat Ramona's shrimp and drink her wine, and then sit in her parlor listening to the straggling lustfulness of Mohammed al-Bakr and his port-said specialist, thinking such thoughts was not exactly commendable. And Monsignor Hilton, what is priestly celibacy? A more terrible discipline is to go about and visit women, to see what the modern world has made of carnality. How little relevance certain ancient ideas have. But at least one thing became clear. To look for fulfillment in another in interpersonal relationships was a feminine game. And the man who shops from woman to woman, though his heart aches with idealism, with the desire for pure love, has entered the female realm. After Napoleon fell, the ambitious young man carried his power drive into the boudoir. Excuse me. And there the woman took command, as Madeline had done, as Wanda might as easily have done. And what about Ramona? And Herzog, formerly a silly young thing, now becoming a silly old thing, by accepting the design of a private life, approved by those in authority, turned himself into something resembling a concubine. Sono made this entirely clear, with her oriental ways. He had even joked about it with her, trying to explain how unprofitable his visits to her appeared to him at last. Je bec, je sème, mais je ne récolte ponte. He joked, but no. He was no concubine, not at all. He was a difficult, aggressive man. As for Sono, she was trying to instruct him to show how a man should treat a woman. The pride of the peacock, the lust of the goat, and the wrath of the lion are the glory and wisdom of God. Wherever you were going with your valise, your fundamentally healthy instincts brought you back. They're wiser than you, said Ramona. Maybe, said Herzog. I am going through a change of outlook. Thank goodness you haven't destroyed your birthright yet. I haven't been really independent. I find I've been working for others for a number of ladies. If you can conquer your Hebrew Puritanism, developing the psychology of a runaway slave, it's your own fault. You look for domineering women. I'm trying to tell you that you've met a different type in me. I know I have, he said, and I think the world of you. I wonder. I don't think you understand. Here she showed some resentment. About a month ago you told me I ran a sexual circus, as if I were an acrobat of some kind. Why, Ramona, that meant nothing. It implied that I had known too many men. Too many? No, Ramona, I don't look at it that way. If anything, it does a lot for my self-esteem to be able to keep up. Why, the very idea of keeping up betrays you. It makes me angry to hear you say that. I know. You want to put me on a hanger level and bring out the Orphic element in me. But I've tried to be a pretty mediocre person, if the truth be told. I've done my job, kept up my end, performed my duty, and waited for the old quid pro quo. What I had coming, naturally, was a sock on the head. I thought I had entered into a secret understanding with life to spare me the worst, a perfectly bourgeois idea. On the side, I was just flirting a little with the transcendent. There's nothing so ordinary about marrying a woman like Madeline or having a friend like Valentine Gersbach. His indignation rose, and he tried to check it. Ramona was being considerate, giving him a chance to sound off to release spleen. This was not what he had come for. And anyway, he was growing tired of his obsession. Besides, she had troubles of her own. And the poet said that indignation was a kind of joy. But was he right? There is a time to speak and a time to shut up. The only truly interesting side of the matter was the intimate design of the injury. The fact that it was so penetrating, custom made exactly to your measure. It's fascinating that hatred should be so personal as to be almost loving. The knife in the wound aching for each other. Much, of course, depends upon the vulnerability of the intended. Some cry out, and some swallow the thrust in silence. About the latter, you could write the inner history of mankind. How did Papa feel when he found that Poplonsky was in cahoots with the hijackers? He never said. Herzog wondered whether he would succeed in holding all this in tonight. He hoped he would, but Ramona often encouraged him to give in to it. She not only spread a supper, but invited him to sing. "I don't think of them as exactly a mediocre pair," she said. "I sometimes see all three of us as a comedy team," said Herzog, "with me playing straight man. People say that Gersbach imitates me, my walk, my expressions. He's a second Herzog. Anyway, he convinced Madeline that he was superior to the original," said Ramona. She lowered her eyes. They moved and then came to rest beneath the lids. By candlelight, he observed this momentary disquiet of her face. Perhaps she thought she had spoken tactlessly. Madeline's greatest ambition, I think, is to fall in love. This is the deepest part of the joke about her. Then there's her grand style, her tics. To give the bitch her due, she is beautiful. She adores being the center of attention. In one of those fur-trimmed suits, she struts in, with her deep color and blue eyes. And when she has an audience and begins spellbinding, there's a kind of flat pass she makes with the palm of her hand, and her nose twitches like a little rudder. And by, one brow joins in and begins to rise. "You make her sound adorable," said Ramona. "We live together on a high level, all of us, except Phoebe. She merely went along." "What is she like?" "She has attractive features, but she looks severe. She comes on like the head nurse." "She didn't care for you." "She didn't care for you?" "Her husband was a cripple. He knows how to make the most of it, emotionally, with his lurid sob stuff. She had bought him cheap because he was a factory damaged. New and perfect, she could never have afforded such a luxury. He knew, and she knew, and we knew. Because this is an age of insight, the laws of psychology are known to all educated people. Anyway, he was only a one-legged radio announcer, but she had him to herself. Then Madeline and I arrived, and a glamorous life began in Ludeville. It must have upset her when he began to imitate you. Yes, but if I was going to be swindled, the best way was to do the job in my own style. Poetic justice. Philosophical piety describes the style. When did you first notice?" "When Maddie began to stay away from Ludeville. A few times she holed up in Boston. She said she simply had to be alone and think things over. So she took the kid, just an infant, and I asked Valentine to go and reason with her." "And this was when he began to give you those lectures?" Herzog tried to smile away the quick welling rancor whose source had been touched. He might not be able to control it. They all lectured. Everyone lectured. People legislate continually by means of talk. I have Madeline's letters from Boston. I have letters from Gersbach, too. All kinds of documents. I even have a bundle of letters written by Madeline to her mother. They came in the mail. But what did Madeline say? She's quite a writer. She writes like Lady Hester Stanhope. First of all, she said, I resembled her father in too many ways. That when we were in a room together, I seemed to swallow and gulp up all the air, and left nothing for her to breathe. I was overbearing, infantile, demanding, sardonic, and psychosomatic bully. Psychosomatic? I had pains in my belly in order to dominate her, and got my way by being sick. They all said that, all three of them. Madeline had another lecture about the only basis for a marriage. A marriage was a tender relationship resulting from the overflow of feeling, and all the rest of that. She even had a lecture about the right way to perform the conjugal act. Incredible. She must have been describing what she had learned from HERZOG. "You don't need to go into it," said Ramona. "I'm sure she made it as painful as possible. In the meantime, I was supposed to wind up this study of mine and become the lovejoy of my generation. That's the silly talk of scholarly people, Ramona. I didn't think of it that way. The more Madeline and HERZOG lectured me, the more I thought that my only purpose was to lead a quiet, regular life. She said this quietness was more of my scheming. She accused me of being a meek kick, and said that I was now trying to keep her in line by a new tactic." "How curious. What were you supposed to be doing?" "She thought I had married her in order to be saved, and now I wanted to kill her because she was doing the job. She said she loved me, but couldn't do what I demanded, because this was so frantic, and so she was going to Boston one more time to think it all through and find a way to save this marriage." "I see." "About a week later, HERZOG came to the house to pick up some of her things. She had phoned him from Boston. She needed her clothes and money. He and I took a long walk in the woods. It was early autumn, sunny, dusty, marvelous, melancholy. I helped him over the rough ground. He pulls his way along with that leg, as you told me, like a gondolier. And what did he say? He said he didn't know how the fuck he would survive this terrible trouble between the two people he loved most in the world. He repeated that. The two people who meant more to him than wife and child. It was tearing him to pieces. His faith in things was going to be smashed." Ramona laughed, and HERZOG joined her. "And then?" "Then?" said HERZOG. He remembered the tremor in HERZOG's dark, red, powerful face, which seemed at first brutal, the face of a butcher, until you came to understand the depth and subtlety of his feelings. Then he went back to the house, and HERZOG packed her things. And what he had mainly come for, her diaphragm. "You don't mean it." "Of course I mean it. But you seem to accept it." "What I accept is that my idiocy inspired them and sent them to greater heights of perversity." "Didn't you ask her what this meant?" "I did. She said I had lost my right to an answer. It was more of the same from me, pettiness. Then I asked her whether Valentine had become her lover." "And what kind of answer did you get?" Ramona, curiously, was greatly excited. "That I didn't understand what HERZOG had given me, the kind of love, the kind of feeling. I said, 'But he took the thing from the medicine chest.' And she said, 'Yes, and he stays overnight with June and me when he comes to Boston, but he's the brother I never had, and that's all.' I hesitated to accept this, so she added, 'Now don't be a fool, Moses. You know how coarse he is. He's not my type at all. Our intimacy is a different kind altogether. Why, when he uses the toilet in our little Boston apartment, it fills up with his stink. I know the smell of his shit. Do you think I could give myself to a man whose shit smells like that?' That was her answer." "How frightful, Moses! Is that what she said? What a strange woman! She's a strange, strange creature." "Well, it shows how much we know about one another, Ramona. Madeline wasn't just a wife, but an education, a good, steady, hopeful, rational, diligent, dignified, childish person like Herzog, who thinks human life is a subject, like another subject has to be taught a lesson. And certainly, anyone who takes dignity seriously, old-fashioned individual dignity, is bound to get the business. Maybe dignity was imported from France. Louis Cortez. Theater. Command. Authority. Anger. Forgiveness. Majesty. The plebeian bourgeois ambition was to inherit this. It all belongs in the museum now. But I thought Madeline herself was always so dignified. Not always. She could turn against her own pretensions. And don't forget, Valentine is a great personality too. Modern consciousness has the great need to explode its own postures. It teaches the truth of the creature. It throws the shit on all pretensions and fictions. A man like Gersbach can be gay, innocent, sadistic, dancing around, instinctive, heartless, hugging his friends, feeble-minded, laughing at jokes, deep to exclaiming, "I love you," or "This I believe," and while moved by these beliefs, he steals you blind. He makes realities nobody can understand. A radio astronomer will sooner understand what's happening in space 10 billion light years away than what Gersbach is fabricating in his brain. "You're far too excited about it," said Ramona. "My advice is to forget them both. How long did this stupidity go on?" "Years. Several years, anyway. Madeline and I got together again a while after this. And then she and Valentine ran my life for me. I didn't know a thing about it. All the decisions were made by them. Where I lived, where I worked, how much rent I paid, even my mental problems were set by them. They gave me my homework. And when they decided that I had to go, they worked out all the details. Property settlement, alimony, child support. I'm sure Valentine thought he acted in my best interest. He must have held Madeline back. He knows he's a good man. He understands, and when you understand, you suffer more. You have higher responsibilities that come with suffering. I couldn't take care of my wife. Poor fish. He took care of her. I wasn't fit to bring up my own daughter. He has to do it for me. Out of friendship, out of pity and sheer greatness of soul. He even agrees that Madeline is a psychopath. No, you can't mean it. I do. The poor crazy bitch, he'd say. My heart goes out to that cracked broad. So he's mysterious, too. What a strange pair, she said. Of course he is, said Herzog. Moses, said Ramona, let's stop talking about this, please. I feel there's something wrong in it. Wrong for us. Now come. You haven't heard it all. There's Geraldine's letter telling how they mistreat the kid. I know, I've read it, Moses. No more. But yes, you're right, said Herzog. Okay, I'll stop it right now. I'll help you clear the table. There's no need to. I'll wash the dishes. No, you certainly will not wash dishes. You're a guest here. I intend to put them all in the sink for tomorrow. He thought, I prefer to accept as a motive not the thing I fully understand, but the thing I partly understand. Utter clarity of explanation to me is false. However, I must take care of June. No, Ramona, there's something about washing dishes that calms me. Now and then, anyway. He fixed the drain, put in soap powder, ran the water, hung his coat on the knob of a cupboard, tucked up his sleeves. He refused the apron Ramona offered. I'm an old hand. I won't splash. As even Ramona's fingers were sexual, Herzog wanted to see how she would do ordinary tasks. But the kitchen towel in her hands as she dried the glasses and silver looked natural. So she was not simply pretending to be a homebody. Herzog had at times wondered whether it wasn't Aunt Tamara who prepared the shrimp remoulade before she slipped out. The answer was no. Ramona did her own cooking. "You should be thinking about your future," said Ramona. "What are you planning to do next year?" "I can pick up a job of some sort." "Where?" "I can't decide whether to be near my son Marco in the East or go back to Chicago to keep an eye on June." "Listen, Moses, it's no disgrace to be practical. Is it a point of honor or something not to think clearly? You want to win by sacrificing yourself? It doesn't work. As you ought to know by now, Chicago would be a mistake. You'd only suffer." "Perhaps, and suffering is another bad habit." "Are you joking?" "Not at all," he said. "It's hard to imagine a more masochistic situation. Everybody in Chicago knows your story by now. You'd be in the middle of it. Fighting, arguing, getting hurt. That's too humiliating for a man like you. You don't respect yourself enough. Do you want to be torn to pieces? Is that what you're offering to do for little June?" "No, no, what good is that?" But can I turn the child over to those two?" "You read what Geraldine said." He knew that letter by heart, and was prepared to recite it. "Still, you can't take the child from her mother. She's my child. She has my genes. She's a Herzog. They're mentally alien types." He grew tense again. Ramona tried to draw him away from this subject. "Didn't you tell me that your friend Gersbach has become a kind of figure in Chicago?" Yes. He started out in educational radio, and now he's all over the place. On committees, in the papers. He gives lectures to the Hadassah, readings of his poems, in the temples. He's joining the Standard Club. He's on television. Fantastic. He's such a provincial character, he thought there was only one railroad station in Chicago. And now he's turned out to be a terrific operator. Covers the city in his Lincoln Continental, wearing a tweed coat of a sort of salmon puke color. "You're getting into a state just thinking about it," said Ramona. "Your eyes get feverish. Gersbach hired a hall. Did I tell you?" "No." "He sold tickets to a reading of his poems. My friend Ashfalter told me about it. $5 for the front seats. $3 at the back of the hall. Reading a poem about his grandfather, who was a street sweeper. He broke down and cried. Nobody could get out. The hall was locked." Ramona could not help laughing. "Ha ha!" Herzog let out the water, wringing the rag, sprinkling scouring powder. He scrubbed and rinsed the sink. Ramona brought him a slice of lemon for the fishy smell. He squeezed it over his hands. "Gersbach." "Still," said Ramona earnestly, "you ought to get back to your scholarly work." "I don't know. I feel I'm stuck with it. But what else is there for me to do?" "You only say that because you're agitated. You'll think differently when you're calm." "Maybe." She led the way to her room. "Shall I play more of that Egyptian music? It has a good effect." She went to the machine. "And why don't you take your shoes off, Moses?" "I know you like to remove them in this weather." "It does relieve my feet. I think I will. They're already unlaced." The moon was high over the Hudson, distorted by window glass, distorted by summer air, appearing bent by its own white power. It floated also in the currents of the river. The narrow rooftops below were pale, long figures of constriction beneath the moon. Ramona turned the record over. And now a woman was singing to the music of Al-Bakar's band. Viens, dans mes bras, je te donne du chocolat. Sitting on the hassock beside him, Ramona took his hand. "But what they tried to make you believe," she said, "it just isn't true." This was what he was aching to hear from her. "What do you mean?" "I know something about men. As soon as I saw you, I realized how much of you was unused. Erotically? Untouched, even. I've been a terrible flop at times. A total flop. There are some men who should be protected. By law, if necessary. Like fish and game." "I'm not really joking," she said. He saw plainly, clearly, how kind she was. She felt for him. She knew he was in pain, and what the pain was, and she offered the consolation he had evidently come for. They tried to make you feel that you were old and finished. But let me explain one fact. An old man smells old. Any woman can tell you. When an old man takes a woman in his arms, she can smell a stale, dusty kind of thing, like old clothes that need an airing. If the woman has let things go as far as that, and doesn't want to humiliate him when she finds that he really is quite old, people do disguise themselves, and it's hard to guess. She will probably go on with it, and that is so awful. But Moses, you are chemically youthful. She put her bare arms about his neck. Your skin has a delicious odor. What does Madeline know? She's nothing but a packaged beauty. He thought what a fine achievement he had made of his life, that aging, vain, terribly narcissistic, suffering without proper dignity, he was taking comfort from someone who really didn't have too much of it to spare him. He had seen her when she was tired, upset, and weak, when the shadows came over her eyes, when the fit of her skirt was wrong, and she had cold hands, cold lips, parted on her teeth, when she was lying on her sofa, a woman of short frame, very full, but after all, a tired short woman whose breath had the ashen flavor of fatigue. The story then told itself. Struggles and disappointments, an elaborate system of theory and eloquence at the bottom of which lay the simple facts of need, a woman's need. She senses that I am for the family, for I am a family type, and she wants me for her family. Her idea of family behavior appeals to me. She was brushing his lips back and forth with hers. She was leading him somewhat aggressively away from hatred and financial infighting. Her head thrown back, he breathed quickly with excitement, skill, purpose. She began to bite his lip, and he drew back, but only from surprise. She felt fast to his lip, taking in more of it, and the result was a leap of sexual excitement in HERZOG. She was unbuttoning his shirt. Her hand was on his skin. She also reached behind, turning on the hassock, to undo the back of her blouse with the other hand. They held each other. He began to stroke her hair. The scent of lipstick and the odor of flesh came up from her mouth. But suddenly, they interrupted their kissing. The phone was ringing. "Oh, Lord," said Ramona. "Lord, Lord. Are you going to answer?" "No, it's George Hoberly. He must have seen you arrive, and he wants to spoil things for us. We mustn't allow him to." "I'm not in favor of it," said Herzog. She turned over the phone and silenced it with the switch at the base. "He had me in tears again yesterday. He wanted to give you a sports car last, I heard. Now he's urging me to take him to Europe. I mean, he wants me to show him Europe. I didn't know he had that sort of money. He doesn't. He'd have to borrow. It would cost him $10,000 staying at the grand hotels. I wonder what he's trying to get across." "What do you mean?" Ramona found something suspect in Herzog's tone. Nothing. Only that he thinks you have the sort of money a tour like that would take. Money has nothing to do with it. There's simply nothing more in the relationship." "What was there to begin with?" "I thought there was something." Her hazel eyes gave him an odd look. They reproved him, or, more in sadness, asked him why he wanted to say such queer things. "Do you want to make an issue of this?" "What's he doing in the street?" "It's not my fault. He made his great pitch for you and failed. So now he thinks he's under a curse and wants to kill himself. He'd be better off at home, on his sofa, drinking a can of beer, watching Perry Mason." You're too severe, said Ramona. Maybe you think I'm giving him up for you and it makes you uneasy. You feel you're pushing him out and will have to be his replacement. Herzog paused, reflecting, and leaned back in his chair. Perhaps, he said, but I think it's that while in New York, I am the man inside. In Chicago, the man in the street is me. But you're not in the least like George Hoberly, said Ramona, with that musical lift he very much liked to hear. Her voice, when it was drawn up from her breast and changed its tone in her throat, that gave Moses great pleasure. Another man might not react to its intended sensuality, but he did. I took pity on George. For that reason, it could never be anything but a temporary relationship. But you aren't the kind of man a woman feels sorry for. You aren't weak. Whatever else, you have strength. Herzog nodded. Once more, he was being lectured, and he didn't really mind it. That he needed straightening out was only too obvious. And who had more right than a woman who gave him asylum? Shrimp, wine, music, flowers, sympathy gave him room, so to speak, in her soul, and finally the embrace of her body. We must help one another. In this irrational world, where mercy, compassion, heart, even if a little fringed with self-interest, all rare things, hard won in many human battles, fought by rare minorities, victories whose results should never be taken for granted, for they were seldom reliable in anyone. Rare things were often debunked, renounced, repudiated by every generation of skeptics. Reason itself, logic, urged you to kneel and to give thanks for every small sign of true kindness. The music played, surrounded by summer flowers and articles of beauty, even luxury, under the soft green lamp. Ramona spoke to him earnestly. He looked affectionately at her warm face, its ripe color. Beyond, hot New York, an illuminated night which did not need the power of the moon. The oriental rug and its flowing designs held out the hope that great perplexities might be resolved. He held Ramona's soft, cool arm in his fingers. His shirt was open on his chest. He was smiling, nodding a little as he listened to her. Much of what she said was perfectly right. She was a clever woman, and, even better, a dear woman. She had a good heart, and she had on black lace underpants. He knew she did. You have great capacity for life, she was saying, and you're a very loving man. But you must try to break away from grudges. They'll eat you up. I think that's true. I know you think I theorize too much, but I've taken more than one beating myself. A terrible marriage and a whole series of bad relationships. Look, you have the strength to recover, and it's sinful not to use it. Use it now. I see what you mean. Maybe it's biology, said Ramona. You have a powerful system. You know what? The woman in the bakery told me yesterday I was looking so changed, my complexion, my eyes. She said, Miss Dunsell, you must be in love. And I realized it was because of you. You do look changed, said Moses. Prettier. Lovely, he said. Her color deepened still more. She took his hand and placed it inside her blouse, looking steadily at him, eyes growing fluid. Bless the girl. What pleasure she gave him, all her ways satisfied him. Her French, Russian, Argentine, Jewish ways. "Let's take off your shoes, too," he said. Ramona turned out all the lights except the green lamp by the bed. She whispered, "I'll be right back." "Would you switch off the whining Egyptian, please? He needs his tongue wiped with a dish rag." She stopped the phonograph with a touch and said, "Just a few minutes," softly closing the door. A few minutes was a figure of speech. She was long at her preparations. She had gotten used to waiting, saw the point of it, and was no longer impatient. Her reappearance was always dramatic and worth waiting for. In substance, however, he understood that she was trying to teach him something, and he was trying, the habit of obedience to teaching being so strong in him, to learn from her. But how was he to describe this lesson? The description might begin with his wild internal disorder, or even with the fact that he was quivering. And why? Because he let the entire world press upon him. For instance, what it means to be a man in a city, in a century, in transition, in a mass, transformed by science under organized power, subject to tremendous controls, in a condition caused by mechanization. After the late failure of radical hopes, in a society that was no community and devalued the person, owing to the multiplied power of numbers which made the self negligible, which spent military billions against foreign enemies but would not pay for order at home, which permitted savagery and barbarism in its own great cities. At the same time, the pressure of human millions who have discovered what concerted efforts and thoughts can do. As megatons of water shape organisms on the ocean floor, as tides polish stones, as winds hollow cliffs. The beautiful super machinery opening a new life for innumerable mankind. Would you deny them the right to exist? Would you ask them to labor and go hungry while you enjoyed delicious old-fashioned values? You yourself are a child of this mass, and a brother to all the rest, or else an ingrate. Dilettante, idiot. There, Herzog thought. Herzog, since you ask for the instance, is the way it runs. On top of that, an injured heart and raw gasoline poured on the nerves. And to this, what does Ramona answer? She says, get your health back. Mens sana in corpore sano. Constitutional tension of whatever origin needed sexual relief. Whatever the man's age, history, condition, knowledge, culture, development, he had an erection. Good currency anywhere. Recognized by the Bank of England. Why should his memories injure him now? Strong natures, said F. Nietzsche, could forget what they could not master. Of course, he also said that the semen reabsorbed was the great fuel of creativity. Be thankful when syphilitics preach chastity. Oh, for the change of heart, a true change of heart. Into that there was no way to con yourself. Ramona wanted him to go the whole hog, pecca fortiter. Why was he such a Quaker in love-making? He said that after his disappointments of recent date, he was glad enough to perform at all, simple missionary style. She said that made him a rarity in New York. A woman had her problems here. Men who seemed decent often had very decent taste. She wanted to give him his pleasure in any way he might choose. He said she would never turn an old herring into a dolphin. It was odd that Ramona should sometimes carry on like one of those broads in a girly magazine, for which she advanced the most high-minded reasons. An educated woman, she quoted him Catullus and the great love poets of all times, and the classics of psychology, and finally the mystical body. And so she was in the next room, joyously preparing, stripping, perfuming. She wanted to please. He had only to be pleased and to let her know it, and then she would grow simpler. How glad she would be to change. How it would relieve her if he said, Ramona, what's all this for? But then, would I have to marry her? The idea of marriage made him nervous, but he thought it through. Her instincts were good. She was practical, capable, and wouldn't injure him. A woman who squandered her husband's money. All psychiatric opinion agreed was determined to castrate him. On the practical side, and he found it very exciting to have practical thoughts, he couldn't stand the disorder and loneliness of bachelorhood. He liked clean shirts, iron handkerchiefs, heels on his shoes. All the things Madeline despised. Aunt Tamara wanted Ramona to have a husband. There must be a few Yiddish words left in the old girl's memory. Shadach Tachlis. He could be a patriarch, as every Herzog was meant to be. The family man, father, transmitter of life, intermediary between past and future, instrument of mysterious creation, was out of fashion, fathers obsolete. Only to masculine women, wretched, pitiful, blue stockings. How bracing it was to think shrewdly. He knew that Ramona was keen about scholarship, his books and encyclopedia articles, Ph.D., University of Chicago, and would want to be Frau Professor Herzog. Amused, he saw how they would arrive at white-tie parties, at the Hotel Pierre Ramona, in long gloves and introducing Moses with her charming lifted voice. This is my husband, Professor Herzog. And he himself, Moses, a different man, radiating well-being, swimming in dignity, affable to one and all, giving his back hair a touch. What a precious pair they made. She with her tics and he with his. What a vaudeville show. Ramona would get revenge on people who had once given her a hard time. And he? He too would get back at his enemies. Yemak Shmo. Let their names be blotted out. They prepared a net for my steps. They digged a pit before me, Break their teeth, O God, in their mouths. His face, his eyes especially dark, intent. He took off his pants, further loosened his shirt. He wondered what Ramona would say if he offered to go into the flower business. Why not? More contact with life, meeting customers. The privations of scholarly isolation had been too much for a man of his temperament. He had read lately that lonely people in New York, shut up in their rooms, had taken to calling the police for relief. Send a squad car, for the love of God. Send someone. Put me in the lockup with somebody. Save me. Touch me. Come, someone. Please come. Herzog shouldn't say definitely that he would not finish his study. The chapter on romantic moralism had gone pretty well, but the one called Rousseau, Kant, and Hegel had him stopped cold. Well, so, wow, of course. What if he should actually become a florist? It was an outrageously overpriced business. But that didn't need to be his problem. He saw himself in striped trousers, suede shoes. He'd have to get used to odors of soil and flowers. 30-some years ago, when he was dying of pneumonia, and peritonitis, his breath was poisoned by the sweetness of red roses. They were sent, probably stolen by his brother Shura, who worked then for the florist on Peel Street. Herzog thought he might be able to stand the roses now. That pernicious thing, fragrant beauty, shapely red. You had to have strength to endure such things, or by intensity they might pierce you inside, and you might bleed to death. At this moment Ramona appeared. She thrust the door open and stood, letting him see her in the lighted frame of bathroom tile. She was perfumed, and to the hips she was naked. On her hips she wore the black lace underthing, that single garment, low on her belly. She stood on spiked-heeled shoes, 3 inches high, only those and the perfume and lipstick. Her black hair. Do I please you, Moses? Oh, Ramona, of course. How can you ask? I'm delighted. Looking downward, she laughed in a low voice. Oh, yes, I see I please you. She held back the hair from her forehead as she bent a little to examine the effect of her nudity on him, how he reacted to the sight of her breast and female hips. Open wide, her eyes were intensely black. She held him by the wrist, where his veins were large, and drew him toward the bed. He began to kiss her. He thought, it never makes sense. It is a mystery. Why don't you take off your shirt? You won't really need it, Moses. They both laughed. She at his shirt, he at her costume. It was a stunner. No wonder clothes were so important to Ramona. They were the setting of that luxurious jewel, her nakedness. His laughter, as it became silent, internal, was all the deeper. Her black lace pants might be utter foolishness, but they had the desired result. Her methods might be crude, but her calculations were correct. He was laughing, but it got him. His whip was tickled, but his body burned. Touch me, Moses. Should I touch, too? Oh, please, yes. Aren't you glad you didn't run away from me? Yes, yes. How does this feel? Sweet. Very, very sweet. If only you would learn to trust your instincts. The lamp, too? Would you rather in the dark? No, never mind the lamp now, Ramona. Moses, dear Moses, tell me you belong to me. Tell me I belong to you, Ramona. To me only, only. Thank God a person like you exists. Kiss my breast, darling Moses. Oh, thank you. Both slept deeply, Ramona without stirring. Herzog was awakened once by a jet plane, something screaming with great power at a terrible height. Not fully roused, he got out of bed and sat heavily in the striped chair, prepared at once to write another message, perhaps to George Horberly. But when the noise of the plane passed, the thought went too. His eyes were filled by the still, hot, flutterless night, the city, its lights. Ramona's face, relaxed by love-making and sleep, had a rich color. In one hand she held the frilled binding of the summer blanket, and her head was raised on the pillows in the thinking posture. It reminded him of that photograph of the pensive child in the next room. One leg was free from the covers, the inside of the thigh, with its wealth of soft skin and faint ripples, sexually fragrant. Her instep had a lovely, fleshy curve. Her nose was curved too. And then there were her plump, pressed toes, in descending size. Herzog, smiling at the sight of her, went back to bed with sleepy clumsiness. He stroked her thick hair and fell asleep